I never thought I'd be the guy who finds out his wife is cheating. I always pictured myself as the devoted husband, the friend who's always there for my partner. Her name is Jenna, and we've been married for 5 years. We met in college, back when we both had dreams bigger than our small-town backgrounds. Jenna was ambitious. She wanted to become a fashion influencer, and I supported her every step of the way. Fast forward to today, and it seems the very ambitions that once drew us together have become the wedge between us. Things began to change about 6 months ago. I noticed subtle shifts in Jenna's behavior. She started spending more time on her phone, often scrolling through Instagram with a glazed look in her eyes. She would rush to lock the screen whenever I entered the room. It seemed harmless at first, just a little obsession with her social media accounts. It was a necessary evil for her brand, or so I thought. I remember joking about her needing to put down her phone and live a little. She would laugh it off, but that laughter was tinged with something that felt off. I brushed it aside, chalking it up to typical relationship stress. Our lives had become a mundane routine of work, chores, and the occasional date night that felt more like an obligation than a pleasure. But then I found the first real sign that something was off. One day, while she was in the shower, I noticed her phone buzzing incessantly on the kitchen counter. Curiosity got the better of me, and I picked it up. There was a message from a guy named Mark. They were flirting back and forth, the kind of messages that made my stomach drop. "Can't wait to see you again. Last night was amazing," followed by a string of heart emojis. I put the phone down, my heart racing. It felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, teetering dangerously close to the abyss. I had so many questions, but the biggest one was, who the hell was Mark? It was a name I didn't recognize, and Jenna had never mentioned him. Instead of confronting her head-on, I decided to keep a low profile and collect more evidence. I needed to be sure before I accused her of something so serious. Days turned into weeks, and I became a detective in my own home. I started monitoring her phone usage and tracking her schedule. I noticed her going out more often, inventing excuses about late meetings with fellow influencers or late-night photo shoots. Each time she left, I found myself consumed by a mixture of anger and heartache. The more I dug, the more apparent it became that my wife was leading a double life. Then everything came crashing down one fateful Saturday. I had planned to surprise her with a romantic dinner, but she'd made plans under the excuse of a branding meeting. I decided to drop in unannounced, thinking I could catch her off guard and maybe prove my suspicions wrong. I drove to the cafe she claimed to be at, but as I walked in, my heart sank. There she was, sitting across the table from Mark, laughing like she hadn't a care in the world. My knees nearly buckled beneath me as I watched her lean in closer to him, their faces lit up by something other than the awful fluorescent lights. I wanted to scream, to run over and make her realize how much she was hurting me, but I stood there frozen, feeling like an outsider in my own life. I felt like I was watching a movie, but this was real, and I was the main character in a nightmare. When she saw me, the laughter died instantly, replaced by a look of sheer panic. Mark looked equally surprised, and in that moment I felt a blend of rage and betrayal that I had never experienced before. I walked out without saying a word, my heart pounding in my chest. I was torn apart inside, my world flipping upside down in an instant. As soon as I got home, Jenna followed suit and I confronted her. The confrontation turned into a chaotic exchange of accusations. She cried, claiming it was just a phase and that I was being too sensitive. I couldn't believe her denial. How could she minimize the pain she had caused? All I could think was that she had shattered the trust we had built together. Through tears, she tried to explain herself, saying I had been distant and that she felt lonely. Her words felt like daggers. Yes, our relationship had been struggling, but it didn't justify her betrayal. It didn't justify her having sex with another man. I told her I needed time to process everything, but inside I was fueled by a burning rage, a desire for revenge that I never knew I had. What would I do next? I had no idea, but this wasn't over. I was going to ensure she felt the consequences of her actions, and I would make sure her social media dreams came crashing down. After all, if I was going to suffer, she would too. Part of me felt guilty for thinking that way, but that feeling quickly turned into determination. I wanted her to know that there were repercussions for betraying someone who loved you. She could lose everything she had worked for, and I was going to help that happen. After the confrontation, I spent hours pacing around my house, feeling the weight of betrayal pressing down on me like a lead blanket. Jenna was crying in the other room, mumbling about how she was sorry, how it was a mistake, but I couldn't stomach her apologies. The truth was, I had lost all respect for her. A part of me wanted to feel sorry for her, to comfort her in her moment of vulnerability, but the wound she had inflicted on me was too deep. Instead, I felt a fire igniting within me, a desire for retribution that I had never imagined I could feel. I needed to formulate a plan, something I could execute without hesitation. Revenge was a dirty word, but in that moment, it felt so right. Jenna had built her life around her social media presence, and I realized that was my path to making her understand what she'd done to me. Her carefully curated image, the followers who adored her, and all those sponsored posts meant nothing to me now. I just wanted to see it crumble. I decided to reach out to an old friend of mine, Derek, who was into tech and had some dubious skills. He was savvy with hacking and had mentioned a few times in passing that he could breach most social media accounts if he had the right tools and motivation. It felt risky, and part of me wondered whether I was crossing a line, but that thought was quickly drowned out by the anger I felt. I texted him, explaining the situation, and asked if he could help me out. Derek agreed to meet me later that night. Over a couple of beers at a local bar, I laid out my plan in detail. I wanted him to breach Jenna's social media accounts, specifically Instagram, where she had amassed a following of over 200,000 fans. I want her to lose everything, I said, my voice trembling slightly with rage. I want her to feel the impact of what she's done. Derek raised an eyebrow, watching me closely. Are you sure about this? Once it's done, there's no going back. You can't unring that bell. I nodded, unable to articulate the whirlwind of emotions inside me. It felt like I was on the brink of making the biggest mistake of my life, but I was so consumed by the thought of revenge that I couldn't back down. I've thought it through. She needs to understand what she's lost. I want her to feel the consequences of her actions. Once we had finished our drinks, we headed back to my place, where I watched as Derek worked his magic on a laptop in my living room. I felt a mix of apprehension and exhilaration. As he navigated through various screens, penetrating digital walls I had never even imagined existed. Within an hour, he had access to Jenna's Instagram account. "All right, what's the plan?" he asked, glancing at me. I couldn't believe we were actually doing this. "Let's start by deleting all her posts," I said. "Everything. Then we'll change her bio to something embarrassing, something that would make her followers question her credibility." He nodded, and with a few keystrokes, her carefully curated world began to unravel. I watched in disbelief as images of Jenna posing in designer outfits, smiling with friends, and showing off her glamorous life vanished one by one. I felt a rush of satisfaction, but at the same time, a pit of dread began to form in my stomach. What if I was taking things too far? But the thought of her with Mark, laughing and flirting, reinforced my resolve. The images of her betrayal flashed in my mind, and I knew I couldn't stop now. Derek then moved on to the bio section of her profile. I suggested something sharp, a jab that would sting, just a cheating wife living her best life. He paused, looking at me with raised eyebrows. "You sure about this? It's pretty brutal." "Leave it," I snapped, feeling a surge of anger. "She needs to feel what I felt." With that, he clicked save, and Jenna's profile was now a stark reminder of her actions. We spent the next hour watching as her followers began to unfollow her in droves. The notifications came flooding in, hundreds, then thousands. Each ding felt like a victory for me, a small measure of satisfaction in a world that crumbled around my heart. After a few hours, we finished the job and Derek left, leaving me alone with the aftermath of what we had just done. I stared at the now empty profile on the screen, feeling a twinge of guilt creep in. Did I really just destroy my wife's entire online identity? But as I replayed the events of the past few weeks in my mind, The late nights, the lies, the betrayal. I pushed that guilt aside. When Jenna got home later that night, she was frazzled and tear-streaked, her makeup smudged. She had a look of panic in her eyes, one that was all too familiar. "What happened to my Instagram?" she shouted, her voice rising in desperation. "I don't know, Jenna," I replied, trying to sound innocent though my heart raced with adrenaline. "Maybe you should ask Mark." She froze, her face going pale. I could see the realization wash over her. She knew I had done something, and whatever it was bad. I watched her deflate, crumbling under the weight of her own choices as she sank to the couch. It was a sight that made my heart ache but also brought me an odd sense of vindication. Jenna began to sob, clutching her phone, desperately trying to recover her account, but it was all gone. She looked at me, tears streaming down her face. "How could you do this to me? How could you do this to me, Jenna?" I shot back, my voice laced with bitterness. "You wanted to play with fire and now you're getting burned. This is just the beginning of what you've lost." In that moment, I understood that betrayal had a ripple effect. It didn't just destroy trust, it dismantled lives. I felt a wave of conflicting emotions crash over me. There was no easy way to fix this, and the consequences had only just begun. I realized I hadn't just attacked her social media presence. I had inadvertently set us both on a path that would lead to a reckoning neither of us was prepared for. As I watched her cry, I knew we were standing at a crossroads. Jenna had made her choices, and now I was forced to confront mine. I had created this chaos, but as I absorbed her pain, I wondered if I was even prepared to deal with what came next. The days that followed were a whirlwind of confusion and raw emotions. Jenna was a mess, and so was I. What I had done weighed heavily on my conscience, but I couldn't shake the feeling of satisfaction that came with seeing her devastated. I had ignited a fire, and now it was spreading, consuming everything in its path. Jenna's social media presence was more than just a hobby. It was her identity, and without it, she felt naked and vulnerable. Her initial shock turned into anger, and she lashed out at me constantly. "You think this is going to teach me a lesson?" she yelled one afternoon, her voice sharp enough to cut through the tension-filled air. "You've just made things worse. You think ruining my career will fix this?" I felt a pang of guilt at her words, but I stood my ground. "You did this to yourself, Jenna. Maybe losing your followers will help you realize what you've had. I'm not the one who cheated on my partner. You made your choices." She scoffed in disbelief, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "Right, because destroying my life is the mature response to infidelity. You're just as bad as I am." I couldn't deny that there was truth in her words. I had crossed a line, one I never thought I'd be willing to step over. But the anger and hurt I felt clouded my judgment. I was stuck in this vicious cycle of retaliation, bitterness driving every decision I made. As the days wore on, Jenna decided to take matters into her own hands, reaching out to her followers to explain the situation. But the response was overwhelmingly negative. People were not just unfollowing her. They were leaving hurtful comments, questioning her integrity and calling her out for being unfaithful. I watched in silence as she tried to salvage what was left of her reputation, but everything she said only seemed to dig her deeper into a hole. "People are turning against me," she cried one evening, sitting on the edge of the bed, her makeup smudged from crying. "They don't care about my side. They just want a scandal." I felt a mix of pity and vindication. Part of me wanted to comfort her, to tell her it would be all right, but another part relished the chaos I had set in motion. "Maybe this is what you need, Jenna." "A reality check," I said, the bitterness still lingering in my tone. She glared at me, her eyes flashing with anger. "You don't even get it, do you? This isn't just about losing followers. It's about people I considered friends turning on me. Your plan backfired, and now I'm losing everything I've worked for." In that moment, I realized how deeply her identity was tied to her social media presence. Jenna had built a brand around her image, her lifestyle, and her relationships. I had stripped her of that, and as the reality of my actions sank in, I began to feel the weight of the consequences. Days turned into weeks, and Jenna's world continued to unravel. She stopped getting invitations to events, her endorsements dried up, and the sponsorships she had worked so hard for vanished overnight. I watched as she spiraled deeper into depression, the vibrant woman I once knew reduced to a shadow of her former self. Despite my anger, I couldn't help but feel a flicker of sympathy. I had wanted her to understand the pain of betrayal, but I hadn't anticipated the extent of her suffering. The guilt began to gnaw at me, and I started to question whether I had made the right choice. In my pursuit of revenge, had I gone too far? One night, I found Jenna sitting on the living room floor, surrounded by crumpled tissues and her phone, which she had thrown across the room in frustration. "I don't know what to do anymore," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I feel like I've lost everything." I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to comfort her, to tell her that we could work together to rebuild what had been lost, but another part still felt the sting of her betrayal. Instead, I sat on the couch, watching her with a mix of pity and resentment. "Maybe you need to take a break from social media," I suggested cautiously. "Focus on yourself for a while." She shook her head vehemently. "No, you don't understand. This is my life. I can't just walk away from everything I've built. It's all I have left." I felt a knot tightening in my stomach. She was right. She had invested so much into her online persona. But in her relentless pursuit of fame and validation, she had lost sight of our relationship. "Jenna, you have me. You have a life beyond Instagram. We can rebuild together if you're willing." She looked up at me, her eyes glistening with tears, but I could see the flicker of uncertainty in her expression. "Can we really?" I wanted to believe we could, but the road ahead seemed daunting. Trust had been shattered, and forgiveness felt like a distant dream. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice heavy with uncertainty, "but we need to try if we want any chance at salvaging this." That night we talked for hours, laying everything bare. We discussed our failures, our needs, and the ways we had neglected each other. It was painful, but it felt like a step in the right direction. We both knew that building back trust would take time, but at least we were acknowledging the truth of our situation. As the days passed, we began to navigate the aftermath of the chaos we had created. Jenna started shifting her focus, seeking therapy to help process the whirlwind of emotions. She began exploring new avenues beyond her influencer lifestyle, dabbling in fashion design and collaborating with local boutiques. I saw a glimmer of hope in her eyes as she tapped into her creativity in a way that wasn't solely reliant on validation from social media. For my part, I was slowly coming to terms with my own actions. I had acted out of anger, and while I felt justified at the time, I realized I needed to own the pain I had caused. It wasn't enough to just seek revenge. I needed to grow as a person and learn from the experience. When I looked at Jenna, I could see the remnants of the vibrant woman I had fallen in love with. She was still there, buried beneath the hurt and regret, and I felt a renewed sense of determination to fight for our relationship. We were at a crossroads, but the journey ahead was uncertain. Our path to healing was long, but I was willing to walk it with her. The damage might have been done, but perhaps, just perhaps, we could find a way to rebuild if we both committed to doing the work. As we faced the reality of our situation, I began to realize that this experience was more than just about revenge or betrayal. It was about learning, growing, and ultimately understanding what it truly meant to love someone. We weren't just fighting for our relationship, we were fighting for ourselves. And although the road ahead was still fraught with challenges, I felt a glimmer of hope. For the first time since all of this began, I could see a possibility for forgiveness. Yet I knew that the scars of our past would always be a part of our journey. Moving forward, it would be up to us to decide how we would carry those scars into our future. As weeks turned into months, the initial turmoil between Jenna and me began to morph into something more manageable. It was as if we were both slowly emerging from a storm that had battered our relationship. The raw edges of our pain were still evident, but the healing process was beginning to take root. Jenna was actively working on her mental health, attending therapy sessions, and even engaging in workshops that focused on both self-love and creative expression. I was proud of her. She was fighting her way back, and it was inspiring to witness. Meanwhile, I took a step back to reflect on my actions. I realized that my initial need for revenge stemmed from my feelings of inadequacy and betrayal. Rather than confronting my own insecurities head-on, I had chosen a path of destruction, one that left both of us in ruins. I began to seek therapy myself, hoping to unpack my own emotions and gain clarity on how to foster a healthier relationship moving forward. Jenna had found new ways to channel her creativity that didn't rely solely on social media validation. She began designing a small clothing line that catered to real women, focusing on inclusivity rather than unattainable standards set by influencer culture. I could see her passion reigniting, and it made my heart swell with pride. The sparkle that had dimmed in her eyes was slowly returning, and it felt like we were both rediscovering ourselves. One Saturday afternoon, while Jenna was sketching designs at the dining table, I decided to bring up something that had been on my mind. "Jenna, how do you feel about getting back on social media?" I asked cautiously. She paused, her pencil hovering over the paper. "Honestly, I don't know. It's been nice not being glued to my phone every minute of the day. I have so many ideas and I want to share them, but I'm terrified of the scrutiny." I nodded, understanding her fear. "You've built something beautiful since stepping back. Maybe you can approach it differently this time, focus on what you love instead of what others expect of you." She considered my words, biting her lip. "Maybe I could start an account dedicated to my designs. It could be more about the art than the influencer lifestyle. I want it to be genuine." We discussed it for hours, and by the end of the day, Jenna had decided that she would create a new account, but this time, it would be a true reflection of who she was, not the polished version that had previously garnered likes and followers based on superficiality. Instead, she would embrace her journey, flaws and all. As she launched her new account, I watched her light up with excitement. She posted a few sketches and shared her vision for the clothing line, along with a heartfelt message about her journey towards self-acceptance. Instead of focusing on gaining followers, she seemed more interested in connecting with those who resonated with her story. The response was overwhelming. While some people still remembered the drama surrounding her previous account and remained skeptical, many others praised her authenticity. It was clear that Jenna's new approach was resonating with people. Comments flooded in, offering encouragement and support. For the first time in a long while, I could see her genuinely smiling as she read the feedback. As weeks passed, Jenna's following began to grow steadily, but what was different this time was the way she engaged with her audience. She responded to comments, asked for feedback, and even hosted live sessions where she discussed body positivity and fashion. It felt refreshing. She was building a community rather than just accumulating numbers. However, I still felt a shadow lingering over our relationship. While we were moving forward in many ways, I knew we hadn't fully addressed the elephant in the room, her affair. We had skirted around the topic, focusing instead on healing and rebuilding, but the unresolved hurt still lay beneath the surface. One evening, as we were winding down after dinner, I decided it was time to have that difficult conversation. "Jenna, can we talk about what happened?" She looked up from her laptop, her expression shifting from focus to concern. "Do we have to?" "Yes," I replied firmly but gently. "We've made progress, but I need to understand what drove you to cheat. It's important for both of us." She sighed, running her fingers through her hair. "I don't know if I can explain it. I was lost, feeling disconnected from you and overwhelmed by my online presence. Mark made me feel seen in a way that I hadn't felt in a long time." Her words stung, but I pushed through the pain. "So, it was about your insecurities." "Partly," she admitted, "but it was also about my need for validation. I got caught up in the idea that my worth was tied to my followers and I wanted to be someone I was. Mark represented a fantasy, a kind of escape from the pressure I felt in my life." We sat in silence for a moment, absorbing what she had just confessed. "Did you ever love him?" I asked, my heart racing. "No," she said, shaking her head vigorously. "It was never about love. I was just seeking something that I felt was missing. It was a dumb mistake and I hate that I hurt you." Hearing her admit that it wasn't love was both a relief and a new wound. "I don't know if I can ever fully trust you again," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I understand that," she replied, tears welling in her eyes. "I'm willing to do whatever it takes to regain your trust. I know I messed up and I can't change the past, but I want to prove that I'm committed to us." proving it is going to take time. I said softly, but I'm willing to work through this if you are. We talked late into the night, delving into the complexities of our emotions. It was painful and cathartic, each revelation bringing both clarity and renewed fear. We laid our vulnerabilities bare, feeling the weight of our scars but also understanding that they didn't have to define us. As the weeks rolled on, we continued to navigate through our healing process. Jenna was dedicated to her new venture, while I was determined to rebuild the trust that had been shattered. We both knew there would be ups and downs, but we were committed to making our marriage work. In those moments of quiet reflection, I found myself contemplating what had happened. While I had initially sought revenge, I now understood that forgiveness was a far more powerful force. Revenge may have felt satisfying in the short term, but it had only deepened our wounds. Choosing to forgive, each of us in our own way, was the key to moving forward. Our journey wasn't going to be easy, but we were finding strength in each other. I had learned that relationships are not defined by the mistakes we make, but rather by how we choose to grow from them. The scars would always be a reminder of our past, but together, we could build something new. As we embraced this new chapter in our lives, I felt a renewed sense of hope. We were not just surviving, we were learning to thrive. In that moment, I realized that true love isn't just about the good times. It's about weathering the storms together and emerging on the other side as stronger individuals and partners. As Jenna and I continued to rebuild our relationship, I noticed a shift in both of us. The wounds we had inflicted on one another were still raw, but we were learning to navigate our way through the complexities of trust, love, and forgiveness. Jenna's clothing line gained traction, and she started collaborating with local boutiques, creating a buzz that felt refreshing and genuine. It was inspiring to see her grow, and I found myself cheering her on from the sidelines. But while Jenna's professional life was beginning to flourish, my personal journey toward healing was still a work in progress. I attended therapy regularly, where I learned to confront my own insecurities and anger. It was difficult sometimes, unearthing feelings I had buried deep, but it was necessary. I had to understand why I had reacted the way I did, why revenge felt like the only path forward at the time. One evening, I came home from therapy, feeling a mix of exhaustion and clarity. Jenna was in the living room, surrounded by fabric swatches and sketches, her eyes sparkling with excitement as she discussed her latest designs. I couldn't help but admire her determination and resilience. It was a stark contrast to the broken woman I had confronted months ago. "Hey, how did it go?" she asked, looking up with a hopeful smile. "It was good," I replied, settling onto the couch beside her. "We talked about how I've been struggling to fully let go of the anger and resentment." Jenna's expression shifted, a hint of concern creasing her brow. "I know I hurt you, and I want to help you heal, but I also understand that it's not something I can fix for you." "I appreciate that," I said, placing a hand on hers. "It's a process. I think the hardest part for me is learning to trust you. Again, I want to believe that you've changed, that you're committed to us." "I am," she insisted, her eyes earnest. "I know I can't change the past, but I can promise that I will never take our relationship for granted again. You mean too much to me." We shared a moment of silence, both of us absorbing the weight of our words. I wanted to believe her, to truly trust her again, but the scar of betrayal was still very much present. As we transitioned into summer, Jenna's clothing line launched successfully, and she even received local media attention. I was there for every milestone, supporting her efforts as she celebrated small victories. We would go out for celebratory dinners, and I watched as she blossomed into a woman who embraced her creativity. It was beautiful to witness, but it also stirred something within me, a mix of pride and fear. One afternoon, Jenna invited a few friends over to help with a photo shoot for her line. I watched from the kitchen as she posed confidently, laughing and engaging with her friends. It was a side of her I had missed, a woman who was carefree and alive, but as I stood there, I felt a wave of unease wash over me. Could I really trust her to remain faithful now that she was back in the limelight? That night, after her friends had left, I broached the topic. "Hey, can we talk about something?" "Of course," she replied, her expression shifting to one of curiosity. I'm proud of you and everything you've accomplished, but I can't help but feel a little anxious about you being back in the spotlight. I worry that the attention might draw you back into old habits. Jenna looked taken aback, her eyes widening. You think I would cheat again after everything that's happened? It's not about you, it's about me and my trust issues, I admitted. I know it's unfair to project my fears onto you, but I can't help it. She nodded, her expression softening. I understand. I've been through the ringer too, and I don't want to go back to that place. I promise to keep communication open. If I ever feel overwhelmed or tempted, I'll talk to you first. I appreciated her willingness to reassure me, but the underlying worry never fully left. As Jenna continued to gain popularity, I found myself grappling with a new reality. I had to learn how to let go of the fear that had begun to control me. As time went on, we both recognized that our relationship was evolving into something new, a different kind of love built on a foundation of understanding and honesty. We sought to become better partners, learning to communicate effectively about our fears and insecurities. While Jenna expanded her clothing line, I focused on my growth, reflecting on how I could contribute to our shared future. However, one evening as I was scrolling through social media, I stumbled upon a post that stopped me cold. It was a photo of Jenna with a male model, one who had worked with her during the photo shoot. They stood close together, her arm draped around his shoulder as they laughed together. The caption read, "Working with the amazing at Jenna Designs on this fantastic shoot. Love her energy." A knot formed in my stomach as jealousy bubbled to the surface. I felt the familiar pang of insecurity. What if she was getting too close to this guy? My mind raced through a thousand scenarios, each more damaging than the last. I sat down on the couch, my heart racing as I felt the anger and fear consuming me. When Jenna came home, I confronted her. "I saw the post with that model," I said, trying to keep my tone even but feeling the crack in my voice. Her expression faltered. "What post? Is it not good?" I showed her the picture and her eyes widened, a look of surprise washing over her face. "Oh, that was just for the shoot. He's nice, but it's purely professional." "Professionally close, huh?" I bit back, trying to rein in my jealousy. "Do you really expect me to believe that? Seriously, you're going to go there?" She shot back, her own frustration mounting. "I'm not that person anymore. I've learned from my mistakes. I want to believe you." I raised my voice slightly, feeling the tension building. "But every time I see you with another guy, it feels like I'm back to square one. I can't help but feel threatened." The conversation quickly spiraled into a heated argument, full of accusations and defensiveness. It was a painful reminder that even after all this time, we were still grappling with the shadows of our past. Jenna took a deep breath, stepping back to collect her thoughts. "This isn't fair. I'm trying to rebuild my career and now you're turning it into a battleground. I can't be held responsible for your insecurities." "Maybe you're right, but they're there, and I don't know how to make them go away," I exclaimed, feeling the weight of my emotions crashing over me. "I want to trust you, but it's hard when I see you laughing and being so comfortable with someone else." She sighed, her frustration giving way to exhaustion. "I want to be transparent with you. I'll share everything about my work, but you need to trust that I'm committed to us." "I know, but it's not easy for me." As the night wore on, we both fell into a state of somber silence. The conversation had been a harsh reminder that while we were making strides, the path to healing was often riddled with setbacks. After a sleepless night, I woke up the next morning to find Jenna already at the dining table, reviewing sketches for her line. Seeing her focus and determination reminded me of how far we had come together, yet I still felt the weight of our argument hovering over us. "Hey," I said softly, approaching her. "I'm sorry for last night. I let my insecurities get the best of me." She looked up, her expression softening. "I'm sorry too. I want you to feel secure in our relationship, but I also need you to trust me. I'll do everything I can to regain that trust. Maybe we can find a way to work through this together," I suggested, feeling more hopeful. "Absolutely," she replied, a small smile creeping onto her face. "Let's take it one day at a time." As the summer days turned into autumn, we both embraced the journey of healing with renewed determination. We learned to communicate more openly about our feelings, taking steps to navigate our relationship with greater understanding. I started to realize that trust wasn't just handed over. It was earned through consistent actions and choices. Jenna was proving her commitment to me every day, and I was learning to confront my fears with honesty and vulnerability. As we walked this path together, I understood that the scars from our past would always be a part of us, but they didn't have to define our future. With each passing day, I felt a sense of hope taking root in our lives again. We were building a love that was resilient, one that had weathered the storm and emerged stronger on the other side. And in that growth, I found comfort. We were not just healing, we were learning to thrive, and I knew that together, we could navigate whatever challenges lay ahead. As autumn settled in, Jenna and I found ourselves in a more stable rhythm. The arguments that once felt like an inevitable part of our daily lives were becoming less frequent. Instead, we were focusing on building a partnership rooted in open communication and mutual support. Jenna's clothing line had gained momentum, and she was now preparing for a local fashion show. She was filled with excitement, and I could see her confidence blooming with each new opportunity. The buzz around her designs had attracted local influencers and boutique owners, and I wanted to be there for every step of her journey. One crisp Saturday morning, she excitedly announced, "I want you to be my model for the fashion show." I chuckled, unsure if she was serious. "You want me to strut down a runway in front of a crowd? I think I'd trip and fall before I even got halfway." She laughed heartily, her eyes sparkling. "That's the point. I want to showcase my clothes on real people, not just professional models. Besides, I believe in showing diversity in fashion." Her enthusiasm was contagious. I found myself agreeing, swept up in the excitement of supporting her dreams. We spent the next week preparing for the show, working on the designs, practicing walking in heels, which was a disaster, and coordinating the details of the event. As the day of the fashion show approached, I couldn't help but feel a mix of nerves and anticipation. This was a significant moment for Jenna, and I wanted to make sure I was fully present. The night before the show, we sat together, going through the final touches. "Are you ready?" Jenna asked, her voice filled with excitement. "I think so. More importantly, are you ready?" I replied, wanting to turn the focus back to her. "I am," she said, beaming. "I just hope I can pull it off. If it flops, I don't know what I'll do." "Hey," I said, taking her hands in mine. "No matter what happens, you've already accomplished so much. You found your passion again, and that's what matters most." "I know," she replied, squeezing my hands. "It means a lot to have you by my side through all of this. You're my rock." As the day of the show arrived, Jenna was a whirlwind of energy. I could see the butterflies in her stomach, but I also saw the fierce determination in her eyes. I felt a swell of pride watching her embrace her dreams. When it was finally time for the show to begin, I stood backstage, my heart racing as I watched her prepare. The lights dimmed, and the music began to play. I felt the energy in the room shift as the first model walked down the runway, and I could see Jenna taking a deep breath, ready to take her place. As she stepped onto the stage, I felt a mixture of nerves and excitement. She was radiant, her outfit a beautiful representation of her vision. The crowd erupted in applause as she walked, her confidence radiating like a beacon. In that moment, I realized how far we had come. Here was Jenna, a woman who had faced her demons head-on, who had come back stronger, and who was now shining in her own right. I felt a rush of emotion, both for her and for us. As the show continued, I couldn't help but reflect on our journey. The pain of betrayal had forged a new path for us, teaching us the importance of honesty, communication, and trust. We had faced our struggles, but we had emerged from the darkness with a deeper understanding of each other. After the show, as Jenna was surrounded by friends and supporters, I snuck in to congratulate her. "You were amazing," I exclaimed, wrapping my arms around her. "Really, you think so?" she asked, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Absolutely. You lit up that stage." As we hugged, I felt a sense of hope wash over me. We were no longer defined by our past mistakes. Instead, we were creating a new narrative together. The journey hadn't been easy, and the scars would always be there, but they were a testament to our growth. The aftermath of the show propelled Jenna's designs into the spotlight, and I stood by her side as more opportunities began to emerge. She was thriving, and I was proud to be part of her journey. We had learned to lean on each other, support one another, and communicate openly about our feelings, fears, and dreams. While there would always be bumps in the road, I felt an unwavering resolve that we could face them together. We had both grown in profound ways, Jenna, by reclaiming her passion, and me, by learning to confront my insecurities and choose forgiveness over revenge. As the seasons changed and the leaves began to fall, I embraced the beauty of our shared journey. I realized that love is not simply about the highs. It's about how we navigate the lows, how we learn from our mistakes, and how we choose to grow together. In that moment, I knew that we were both committed to building a future that celebrated our vulnerabilities as much as our strengths. The road ahead might be uncertain, but with each step, we were crafting a love story that was uniquely ours, one that had been forged in adversity and was now blooming in resilience.